Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, an ongoing media investigation about the wrangling over so-called legacy lawsuits has raised questions about the control that the oil industry has on local politics. We'll look down that well. Local Democrats and Republicans might not agree on Common Core, but they have found a common problem: cash. We'll also look at some unfinished business, road home claims that are still unsettled, and we'll follow the numbers on job growth and labor needs. And with August nearing, the Saints season strengthens to Category 1 as the team heads to training camp. We'll take a look. On the roster for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. From Baton Rouge, Jeremy Alford, publisher, editor, La Politics Weekly. Kathy Finn, freelance business journalist and business columnist for New Orleans Magazine. And David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And we're going to first start with Jeremy, and once again, we're talking Common Core, and I think we're going to be talking Common Core for a while. So give us the latest. Lawsuits are flying now.
Right. You know, this whole thing was supposed to be worked out on the bureaucratic level with the Bobby Jindal's administration and John White's education administration. But they are so fundamentally far apart, they may as well be using smoke signals to communicate. So what are the stakeholders to do? They lawyer up, and that's what happened this week. On Monday, we saw a lawsuit filed by 17 lawmakers, 13 Republicans, most of them are from the fiscally conservative fiscal hawks, and 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats and 2 independents. And they are suing the Bessie Board and the Department of Education, claiming that they did not follow the proper laws to implement Common Core, that they did not have the public hearings. The next day, we saw a group of parents and a group of teachers from New Orleans and from Baton Rouge and a charter school from New Orleans file suit against Governor Jindal, his Division of Administration, and the Contract Review Office, claiming that Governor Jindal overstepped his reach, that suspending the contracts, that he's doing so to influence policy. So 2 different lawsuits, 2 different judges, both filed in Baton Rouge District Court. That seems to be the most feasible way forward now. Now, I do know that there's a group of lawmakers who are looking to travel to other states to find out what happened legislatively. So looking ahead, this could very well be an issue in next year's legislative session as well.
Now, Bessie is looking to lawyer up as well, but the administration is saying, we don't think so.
Right, and things are getting very political, very personal between the administration and Bessie and the Department of Education. You know, we saw a lawsuit filed Monday, a lawsuit filed Tuesday. By Wednesday, John White, Superintendent of Education, was having to explain to Bessie that there are rumors going around that they're looking into travel and lodging, that the administration is accusing them of maybe getting too cozy with the folks who create these tests. By Thursday, the private attorney for Governor Bobby Jindal was having to answer accusations from the Associated Press that he had received more than $1 million in contracts since leaving as executive counsel to Bobby Jindal. So this is it's getting very real, very political, and very fast.
Now, the business community has largely gone on record saying that it supports Common Core. Are we going to see them also in this line of legal action?
I think it's within the realm of possibility, and that's one of the more interesting things that's happening with Common Core is creating these very strange bedfellows. You know, Governor Bobby Jindal has always been on the opposite side of the unions, and now he has one of the teachers' unions on his side. This charter school that's suing him now, you know, he was at one time an ally with them. The business community, one time an ally with Jindal, is now very well can end up suing him, you know, somewhere down the line. So that, you know, which right is left and which left is right, and pretty much anything could happen on this issue, it feels like.
That's like the Catholic Church also creates a strange situation because they have stood behind Common Core, right, with the Catholic schools, and Jindal has the voucher program that he wants to be in place to have kids be able to go to Catholic schools and private schools, and potentially these kids would be going to a school that's a Common Core school if they were using the vouchers.
So we're in a total state of confusion. Errol, did you have a comment?
Whenever Bobby Jindal does something, people always explain it in terms of, well, he's running for president. But beyond that, I mean, is that not fair? Is there a real deep down philosophical point that he's standing up for? Or is he doing it because he's running for president?
Well, really, this is a wedge issue with Democrats, and you can't help but look at this from a political angle. Bobby Jindal has been running for president for almost 6 years now. But you listen to Bobby Jindal, and really the only thing he's talking about are contracts. And I don't think the reporters up at the Capitol ever thought they would know so much about procurement law. But the points are very much. He doesn't really address education issues directly. He's trying to find an end around to stopping Common Core.
So, bottom line right now, out there, parents, teachers, school systems, not to mention the students, they want to know what tests they're going to be facing. Do we know right now?
The best answer is we don't know.
We don't know, and we're just weeks away from the start of the school system.
Exactly, and so there are some hopes that the judges that are overseeing these cases in Baton Rouge will expedite the hearings, but there's no promise of that, and I think that's why we're seeing lawmakers already starting to focus on the 2015 regular session.
And it's not just the tests, it's not just when you get to the testing, because if you drop the tests, you got to change the total curriculum. I mean, because
that's been
you
in
have to
place.
learn it a certain way in order to be able to pass the test, essentially.
Right, but that curriculum has been, or they've been developing at any rate,
For 4
to
years,
those Common
right?
Core standards, for years now.
Right, and that's why if you look at other states that have gotten rid of Common Core, or they've shelved certain parts of it, the common thread that you see in all of them is that there are some vestiges of Common Core left in these states. There's small parts in the teaching and the curriculum and the tests. You're not going to get rid of it completely, not after everything, not after all the time that teachers and schools have spent on it.
We'll be monitoring that. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. David, legacy lawsuits. You and your colleague Mike Perlstein have been doing an ongoing series taking a look at this. Can you just quickly say, okay, what is a legacy lawsuit, to explain what that is, and what are you all discovering?
Well, legacy lawsuits are suits filed by landowners who have found various means found contamination on their properties left sometimes decades and decades ago by oil and gas operations drilling on their property. And most of them have contracts and leases that lay out that they have to restore the land to the original state and clean up any kind of contamination. But there's also some that are not very specific about that. And so there was a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court in 2003. It was called the Corbello case. It was in Southwest Louisiana, and it was critical because the Supreme Court determined that tens of millions of dollars that went to this landowner to clean up the property didn't actually have to be used for cleanup. So that started this huge fight, many forms of legislation to try to rein them in, and what we found is you got 363 lawsuits filed, and according to state records, only 12 have been cleaned up to state standards. And so the question is, are these lawsuits doing what they need to do to get things cleaned up? Is there more that the state should have been doing all along without the lawsuits to actually get properties cleaned and protect us as the residents of Louisiana, because this affects groundwater, aquifers, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Now these, like you said, are varying types of agreements, but essentially the oil companies have agreed to clean up the lands that they have been involved in.
Well, the thing that's very important to point out about these lawsuits, because the oil and gas industry has spent a lot of money to vilify the plaintiffs' lawyers who brought these suits. But the key thing to point out is that without these suits, it appears that these oil companies would not have come forward to clean the properties up at all, because they are given the opportunity to do that in a very clear, structured way under the Office of Conservation at the state, and they haven't done that voluntarily.
It's much the same thing that the state faces with the offshore industry and cleaning up shuttered wells, for instance. You know, very often the state has not enforced laws that are on the books as far as the cleanup and the closure of those wells is concerned.
So that leads us to the question, why won't the state enforce that?
Well, and then the argument from people who represent these landowners and environmental groups is that it's because the state is in Big Oil's pocket. And Big Oil, it doesn't have the same kind of sway in terms of the amount of revenues that it brings into the state budget that it used to in the 50s, 60s time frame when it was supposed to be about a third or more. But now it's still in the 13% range, and that's a sizable punch that they pack at the legislature and with the governor's office.
Now, Big Oil, though, will say, well, that's hogwash. We're not really. You know, we really don't have that much control over the legislature. Is that what you're finding, Jeremy?
Well, I can tell you with certainty that this is an issue that lobbyists love, because oil and gas and opponents keep going to the legislature and they can't figure it out, and it keeps coming back up. And this is an issue that employs lobbyists and media professionals on both sides. And you know, oil and gas does have a tight grip over the legislature. You know, there is a fundraising circuit in Baton Rouge, and one of the hottest stops is oil and gas. If you want to run for re-election, more likely than not, you need to go raise money from oil and gas. But it's not only the money that they're putting into this. You got to understand that a large number of lawmakers have the industry in their backyard. It creates a lot of jobs.
Right.
But they do sink a lot of money into the legislative process. They do spread money around.
And David, real quick with you, you have one more in the series coming up next week? One more
Yes,
installment?
next Wednesday we'll have the final kind of wrap up. And looking forward, we're going to look at how, you know, the coastal land loss lawsuits, most prominently that you see with the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority and the fight over that, and Jindal signing legislation to kill that. That's the next battleground.
Okay, thanks a lot, David. Over to Kathy right now. And job growth. We are seeing an industry growth, certain sectors of our economy where we need workforce because there's going to be a lot of jobs there.
We've talked before about the boom, the petrochemical boom going along throughout South Louisiana, along the Mississippi River and elsewhere, and the tens of thousands of jobs that are expected to be created with that boom in construction and other things over the next even 5 years. I mean, it's just really, it's a huge surge of jobs that are going to become available, become open. And there's already concern, of course, about the workforce. Will we have enough people to fill those jobs? This is something that Louisiana Workforce Commission has been working on with Department of Economic Development for some time now, because they realize this is coming and that the people are not there yet. We saw just this week an interesting twist on this when the oil and gas industry, a group of executives formed a pact with educators, with the Workforce Commission, DED, and some others, to develop a curriculum for the offshore industry. This is actually to fill separate from the petrochemical boom that's going on onshore, they expect a boom offshore as well. They project that the number of platforms in the Gulf of Mexico could double over the next 10 years. That's going to create a huge demand for workers of all kinds. And they're very interested. They need people in the science, they call them STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, and
there's an M there.
There's an M there too, mathematics, and
important M.
These are the people that they're going to need, and so these folks came together, and they're actually going to develop a curriculum with the idea of developing a certification process for the offshore industry
through community colleges.
Through community colleges around the state, and. This is kind of an unusual. We've seen all kinds of collaborations between business and educators before on things like this, but I think this is the first time that we've seen a curriculum that's quite that broad. And the curriculum isn't done yet. This is something they have agreed to do, but they expect to have demand for 30,000 to 40,000 workers, and they know what they need, and they want to be sure that they're going to have those people available.
Right. And I think that's trickling down also to not just the community college level, but into secondary, into high schools.
In some cases, they're reaching into high schools, yes.
Because there is a new program underway it was legislation passed this session called Jumpstart, which basically is focused on doing that, career technical education to really grow our workforce, and beginning at the high school level, and sort of twofold purpose there. Right. It's to give the kids an idea of how their education is relevant, but also keep them in school.
Well, there's a recognition across the nation that we need more of those STEM STEM-educated people, because there is a shortage nationally in science, technology, engineering, and math. And so you see these initiatives around the country. Another interesting thing that I wrote about recently was welders. You know, that's an industry where there's, or a kind of job where there's been a chronic shortage for decades, but it's getting worse, and it's particularly bad with the boom that's going on in Louisiana, and with the oil industry, the oil and gas industry, and the shipbuilding industry, which, you know, welding is a part of every single type of commercial and industrial construction you can think of.
And think about this with the welders, they end up drawing in this funnel from the Philippines that we featured in our stories and our investigation, and that's how you end up with accidents and problems with training and language and communication.
Right.
And it's they've had the deaths offshore from that.
Well, once again, there's going to be a focus in secondary education now, in high school education. So thanks a lot, Kathy. Interesting. Okay, this is a time of year that so many people just wait for longingly. Saint season. Errol.
Well, speaking of jobs, there's a company here that has about like 80 to 90 jobs. They're all high-paying jobs. They're seasonal jobs, and for the most part, you work on Sundays. And so, if you can get a job with this company, you're in good shape. But yeah, the Saints preseason training started today in West Virginia. During the history of the Saints, the first couple of years they went to the West Coast for training, and then there were a couple of years they were in Thibodeau and Hattiesburg, but there were weather problems when they did it locally, and so they said, here you have a nice climate and it would be a better environment. But I think what's interesting about this team is that excitement really seems to be high. I mean, excitement is always high, but they're really talking really positively about the Saints, this being another big season. The same way they were talking before would prove to be the Super Bowl season. I mean, is that same sort of mood that you have. What's happened since the Super Bowl season? The year after you win a Super Bowl, it's hard to recover because, first of all, you got a big target on your back. You lose a lot of your players because a lot of people are going after them. Players figure, I've won a Super Bowl, let me move on. Remember, we lost Scott Fujita and we lost some other players. And so it's hard to come back the year after winning a Super Bowl. Maybe the year after that you can, but with the Saints, that was when all the bounty situation started and losing the coach for a year. And so rebuilding. And so there's about a 2 or 3 year stretch that we just lost rebuilding, having a good team, but not quite what it takes. But this year, all that seems to be over. There's a lot of players who, with the championship team, who just aren't there anymore. But there's a lot of new talented players, and people are just very, very optimistic. And hey, and all the people that are going through football withdrawal, 2 weeks from tonight, first preseason game on the road, and then in 3 weeks from tonight is the first home preseason game, so it's coming fast.
Well, that's really very exciting. And right now, though, they're not here. They're in West Virginia at the Greenbrier, starting their preseason training.
They're in West Virginia. Supposedly, the owner of that resort, he had a troubled resort, and he said, "Man, if only I can get an NFL team here." He'd been trying to lure a team. He'd supposedly gone after the Washington Redskins, which geographically would make more sense, but for some reason was able to get the Saints, and so able to build some excitement there too.
Not an unpleasant place to be.
They were talking about how the weather was cooler than what they're used to, but then you wonder, well, is it going to affect their conditioning if they go crazy dying in the New Orleans heat or in Millsaps or wherever?
Really toughen
and then
them
they're
up,
toughened up, and now in this way that they're all going to be soft.
On paper, the Saints are really high up there as a contender. There's no doubt about it. But we all know all it takes is a key injury. Something happened to Drew Brees or something.
Don't even say that, Errol.
Okay. I didn't say that.
No, we'll take that back. Don't even say that. Okay. Thanks a lot, Errol. All right, campaign cash now. The parties, the political parties, are getting a little bit worried about the money coming their way. You wrote a piece about that.
Right. This is the unholiest of unions in Louisiana politics right now. The Democrats and the Republicans, the two parties in Louisiana, are sitting down at the same side of the table. And they're getting concerned because of super PACs. And super PACs can raise unlimited amounts of money, and they're not as regulated as the parties. So the parties can see what's on the horizon. You look at a wealthy donor who could, nickel and dime his influence with capped giving with the parties, or he could go throw a few million to a super PAC and see an immediate impact in a race. So the Republican Party has taken a different tack than the Democrats. They have filed suit in federal court asking a judge to give them the same rights as a super PAC to use for something they call independent expenditure accounts. The Democrats, meanwhile, are looking to take a policy route. They're trying to work with Congress, they're trying to work with the administration of the president to get some of these laws changed.
So there are limits right now on what can be given to a political party?
Correct.
As opposed to with PACs, it's just unlimited. So
Super-
there are different places where where donations can come from. There's the PACs, the super PACs, and then also from the political parties, and people can donate directly to candidates too.
Correct.
Is that correct? But there are limits for the political parties and the candidates. Is that right? How much that can be donated? What are those limits?
The party at one time could take an unlimited amount of soft money, but the laws changed about 12 years ago. There are limits on the hard money that they can accept. And the reason that Republicans are filing suit, they've tried to do this before in the past and they've been unsuccessful. But there was a recent court decision that ruled that individuals can give to as many candidates and PACs and party donations as they want in one cycle. So Republicans feel like they can, that this is a reason that they could win in court.
Jeremy, because the Republican Party has always had more support from big business, you can see where their money comes from. But who is giving money to the Democratic side now?
I think it's still coming from there's some union money that's moving through there. There's trial lawyers, obviously. If you look at Mary Landrieu and Bill Cassidy, a lot of folks who are thumbing through the campaign finance reports are surprised that both are doing fairly well with big business in Louisiana. So in that race, at least, you're seeing business at play on both sides.
A lot of that is oil money betting on the candidates. Too.
Right. Well, of course, with Mary Landrieu's chairmanship of the Energy Committee, she's pulling in oil and gas donations from around the country.
And she's got Boise Bollinger doing her commercials.
Her commercials, right? Yeah.
Right. But in limits for donations, for me, if I wanted to donate to a candidate, how much could I donate directly to a candidate?
I'm not off the top of my head.
Okay, because
it just was $1,000 was some kind of a limit. Right?
I think it's a little bit.
It's
I'm
not unlimited.
I'm not sure.
It's not unlimited. Put it that way.
Yes, no.
It's
if you give them to a super PAC, it is.
Unlimited too, yeah.
Oh,
so I could give
is
as much as I wanted
PAC.
to a super PAC. But a super PAC, what can a super PAC then do with that money? Can they directly support a candidate?
Yes.
They can.
But they cannot coordinate with that candidate.
Well, what does that mean?
That means, for example, there's a super PAC called the Fund for Louisiana's Future that was originally established to help David Vitter be elected to governor in next year's election cycle. They can run ads touting David Vitter, talking about his accomplishments, but they cannot speak with anyone that is involved with the Vitter campaign to coordinate that activity.
Okay, it's all real clear. Thank you, Jerry.
So it's independent campaiigning.
Yeah,
like any one of us could go and campaign for someone on our own without having to coordinate. Yeah.
Yeah, but for a super PAC to spend money on behalf of a candidate, they cannot communicate at all with the candidate or that campaign.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeremy. Over to David right now, and something also that isn't necessarily too clear, particularly to people who have received road home money, is that some of them have said you need to give it back.
Well, we've seen this a number of times over the years, and in the last year and a half, 2 years, the state has intensified its efforts to try to recover money. The federal government, HUD, which funded the road home with $10 billion, is saying if you don't spend the money on what it's intended, once it's passed on to the homeowners, you got to give it back. And who's responsible for giving that back? The state to the feds. So the state, in turn, wants to turn around to the homeowners who haven't used the money correctly to collect it from them before they have to pay public money back to the feds. And that process has been very difficult because they still haven't been able to figure out what's going on with about 30,000 of the homeowners, where they stand in the process, because they've sent out letters and they're really relying on them because it's this covenant deal that they have to comply with the covenants. It's very hard to enforce and monitor from the state perspective. So they're really relying on road home applicants, recipients of the grants, to self-report what's going on, and they've not been terrifically successful.
All right. So is the company that ran the Road Home program, ICF?
Yes.
I know some people who received money said, well, they are the ones who really are at fault here because they miscalculated. Why are you telling me that I need to give the money back? Get it from them. Is that
right.
still being
and
pursued?
That is a situation that is the case with a small number of homeowners, and I've featured that in some stories. I think the focus now is on people who are definitely not in compliance, but they have various unmet needs. They may have been the victims of contractor fraud or forced mortgage payoffs, and there are provisions in the Road Home enacted in the last year or so that would allow them to collect additional funds to get them over the hump. But they don't know it. They're being told by their case managers that work for the Road Home program, we don't know anything about that, and it's just been a very difficult situation with poor communication by the program. And so there have been some hearings recently. The program, the leadership at the state is saying that they're going to try to figure out a way to get better case management and try to help people over the finish line if that can be done. The other part of their challenge is figure out the people who've absconded with the money and go after them.
How do they find those people?
Well,
I mean, some people are just gone.
Right, and they've got to go after, they've got to do fraud investigations. They've got people doing that in the federal government, and they've got to be aggressive. And the tough thing is they can make a mistake if they go and get aggressive with somebody who isn't committing fraud and is really trying. Then it looks bad. It's a black eye.
About how much money are we talking about here?
Well,
Would you say that there would have to be paid back?
The theory from the state is that most of the people that they haven't been able to locate and that are not in compliance, it's just paperwork issues, and it may not be a lot of money.
Okay.
But I think that it sounds like they're putting out letters trying to collect, several $1 million.
All right, David, thanks a lot. Right now, time to look ahead. Errol.
Speaking of Drew Brees, he's made a big play in Mid-City. He's opening a Jimmy John's where there used to be a Quiznos and the little gazebos in front of Rouse's on North Carolina. So Jimmy John's comes to Mid-City.
All right. Jeremy.
We're roughly a month away from qualifying for the fall elections, so we're looking for any surprises. We want to make sure that Edwin Edwards qualifies in the 6th, Vance McAllister qualifies in the 5th, and of course Mary Lander and Bill Cassidy in the Senate race.
All right. Kathy.
Next week, the state officially opens bidding to private insurers who want to participate in the state's Medicaid program called Bayou Health. This is they're in the 3rd year of this program now, and in the first rounds, it really rankled a lot of doctors and hospitals. So they're putting out a new request for proposals for bids on those contracts next week, and we'll see what happens with that.
Okay, thanks a lot. David?
And look for my last piece in the Tainted Legacy series that I've done with Mike Pearlstein. I think you'll be very surprised about how some of these cases have been manipulated and the problems going forward.
And again, that's next Wednesday?
Yes.
And what time?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. All right. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here. And thank you all so much for joining us. And we certainly hope to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.